Everyone in Merrill County knew about the cornfield behind Briar Ridge Farm. Not because it was especially large or productive, but because of the sound. A sound no one could ever fully describe, but everyone agreed was wrong. They called it the Screamer. For decades, it had been more of a campfire tale, the kind whispered by kids huddled around bug zappers and burning marshmallows. Supposedly, if you walked the edge of the cornfield past midnight in September, you'd hear something breathing in rhythm with your own, and if you stepped into the rows, the Screamer would follow. Most dismissed it, until last fall, a senior named Kyle, a quiet, loner type with a fascination for urban legends, decided to stream himself walking through the cornfield live on social media. It was meant to be a Halloween stunt. He was calm, even cocky, making jokes as he pushed his way into the rustling green, his flashlight beam bobbing wildly. For the first 10 minutes, it was uneventful, just rows and rows of endless stalks. But then, the audio picked up something else. Breathing. Not his. At first, the viewers assumed it was a hoax. Then came a low, gurgling whine. Not quite human, not quite animal. Kyle's voice wavered. "Anyone else hear that?" he said, before the signal cut to static. They never found him. Just his phone, cracked and abandoned in the dirt between two rows, still recording for an hour after the feed dropped. The only thing captured in that hour was the sound of wind and something that screamed, long and low, just once. After that, the field was closed off. The owners claimed crop rot, but locals weren't fooled. They knew something had changed in those stalks. What made this incident more disturbing was what followed. People started reporting dreams, vivid, grotesque ones. Nightmares of standing in a narrow corridor of corn, unable to move, with rows of stalks whispering in voices that sounded like their own. They'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, with dirt under their fingernails. A few swore they could still feel the pressure of hands or claws on their shoulders. And then the disappearances began. Not all in the field. That's what made it worse. A gas station attendant vanished during his shift. A postal worker never returned from a delivery route. A toddler was found wandering alone at sunrise with no recollection of how he got outside. All within a 10-mile radius of the field. There was a pattern, but a subtle one. Each person who vanished had visited the cornfield at some point in the last 2 years. Even briefly, even just to take a picture. Investigators found no links. But there was one detail they didn't publicize, something that only came to light through a leaked audio clip from a police body cam. It was recorded during a search party for Kyle, when officers swept the rows before the field was locked down. On the tape, there's a minute of silence, then heavy breathing, and then a voice. It's not Kyle's. It's not any of the officers. It's deeper, jagged, almost glitching. It simply says, "I'm still hungry." Some said it was a prank. Others weren't so sure. The tape was buried, and the officer who leaked it reportedly quit the force a week later. According to his neighbor, he refused to sleep indoors, claiming walls weren't thick enough to keep the corn out. Strange thing to say, unless you've heard the Screamer. The cornfield was eventually burned, accidentally, according to local news. A freak lightning strike, they claimed. But witnesses say there was no storm that night, just a dry sky and the sudden, brilliant blaze that swallowed the entire patch of land in under an hour. By morning, only ash remained. For a while, the dream stopped. The whispers faded. But this year, as September rolled around again, the story started up once more. People passing the empty field say they hear the rustle of stalks that aren't there. One woman swore she saw a flashlight beam bobbing in the distance, the same pattern Kyle had made on his live stream, right before it cut out. Most terrifying of all, just last week, a man hiking past the Briar Ridge property vanished. His name was Marcus. His brother posted a photo of him taken moments before, standing at the edge of the empty field, laughing. In the background of the photo, there's nothing but dead grass and what looks like a single corn stalk standing perfectly upright where no corn has grown for months. People zoomed in, of course. Internet sleuths tore the image apart, enhancing shadows and filters. What they found still haunts message boards today, because in the shadow cast by that lone stalk, they swear there's the outline of a face. Twisted, stretched, and screaming. And just like before, the dreams are back. There is nothing particularly unusual about the cornfield behind Darren's uncle's property in Iowa. It was exactly what you'd expect. Long rows of rustling green in the summer, brittle yellow in the fall, and dead silent come winter. But for Darren, who had moved in after a rough patch back in Chicago, the cornfield wasn't just farmland. It became an unspoken boundary, one he was told never to cross after sundown. His uncle never gave a clear reason. Just the usual, things get disoriented out there at night, and best stay close to the porch after dark. Darren assumed it was a mix of superstition and country paranoia. That was until he noticed the scarecrow. It stood alone near the center of the field, a distant silhouette on a wooden cross, with arms stretched wide like it had been crucified by wind and time. Burlap skin, straw hands, a stitch mouth, but the eyes were too dark. Not just painted black, but almost deep enough to catch sunlight like pools of water. Darren first noticed the scarecrow seemed to move. Not walk or twitch, nothing dramatic, but it rotated, slightly, barely, just enough that its stitched face seemed to always face the house. Even when Darren walked the back fence line, the scarecrow's head appeared to turn subtly, just enough to stay watching him. He told his uncle, "It's just the wind," his uncle muttered a little too quickly. "It's meant to rotate a little, keeps the crows guessing." But Darren wasn't a crow, and he wasn't guessing. One night, curiosity overwhelmed fear. It was late September, and a harvest moon turned the cornfield into a rippling sea of gold and black. Darren stepped off the porch at 10:03 p.m., phone flashlight off, guided only by the silver light from the sky. The deeper he walked into the rows, the quieter the world became. Like the corn absorbed all sound. It took longer than expected to reach the scarecrow. The rows felt endless, looping. At one point, Darren turned back, only to realize he couldn't even see the house lights anymore. But he pressed on until he finally reached it. Up close, the scarecrow looked wrong. Too tall for any frame. The arms weren't wood. They were gloved hands nailed through the wrists. The stitched smile was made from actual thread sewn through the burlap face. And one of the eyes was glass. Human glass. A prosthetic eye. The air around it was cold. Sharply cold, like a door to a freezer had been opened in the middle of the field. Darren raised his phone to snap a picture. The second the flash went off, something clicked behind him. A soft pop like a knee joint giving out. He turned. Nothing. But when he looked back at the scarecrow, it had blinked. The glass eye had moved. The stitched eyelid hung lower than before, as if something underneath it had twitched. Darren stepped back. One step, then another, and then he heard it. Straw rustling behind him. Not wind, not birds, but the deliberate, dragging shuffle of something tall and heavy shifting in the rows. He ran. The rows seemed to close in around him, corn scraping his arms, snagging his hoodie, until he burst through the last wall of stalks and hit the open field behind the house. He looked back. The scarecrow was still on the cross, still nailed, still staring, but now its head was tilted, slightly, like it was listening. Darren didn't sleep that night, and in the morning, the scarecrow was gone. The cross stood empty. When Darren asked his uncle, the old man just stared at the window, quiet, and then he muttered, "It chooses someone. Every few years. Never twice. You saw it blink, didn't you?" Darren didn't answer. Later that day, his phone buzzed with a notification. One of those auto-edits his phone generated from recent pictures. It was titled Moments in the Corn. When he opened it, the montage began with the photo he took the night before. The scarecrow up close. Still, lifeless. But at the end of the video, in the final second, the image glitched. The scarecrow turned its head. Not much, just a little, and blinked. But in the reflection of its glass eye, you could see him, standing right behind himself. There's a certain unease that settles in when you're surrounded by something that shouldn't be alive, but somehow feels aware of you. For me, that place was an old cornfield just outside my hometown, a patchwork of twisting rows that seemed to stretch endlessly under the moonlight. It started on a late summer evening. I was 16, and like most teenagers, I thought I was invincible. A group of friends and I decided to test our courage by daring each other to cross the biggest cornfield in the county, the one everyone called the Whispering Rose. No one talked much about it during the day, but after sunset, the place earned a reputation for strange sounds and missing people. I volunteered first. I was sure I'd just laugh it off and prove there was nothing to fear. But as soon as I stepped into the field, a heavy silence fell. The usual rustle of the corn leaves was gone. The wind had died, and even the crickets had stopped chirping. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the mind. Then I heard it, soft, slow rustling coming from deep within the stalks, but it wasn't random. It was deliberate, almost like something was moving through the corn, stepping carefully but purposefully. What made it worse was the sound wasn't just rustling. It carried a whisper, a faint, breathy voice that seemed to say my name. James! James! I froze. My heart thudded hard enough to echo between the corn stalks. I whispered back, "Who's there?" No answer, just a rustling again, closer now, weaving between the rows as if something was circling me, studying me. The voice wasn't just calling out, it sounded knowing me. I tried to run, but the rows shifted like a maze. Every direction looked the same, a wall of yellow-green stalks blocking my path. The rustling followed, slower now, patient. Then the whisper returned, clearer this time. "Don't be afraid, James." A chill ran down my spine. The voice was oddly calm, almost kind, but the sound of it in the quiet darkness felt wrong. I called out, "Who are you? What do you want?" The only answer was a sudden, sharp rustle, like someone brushing past me, but no one was there. I ran blindly, my footsteps muffled by the thick dirt, but the whisper grew louder, circling me, always just behind the next row. "James, come find me." Panic took hold, but I kept going. Then I stumbled on something soft, a piece of worn cloth. I pulled it from the dirt and recognized it immediately. My sister's old scarf. The one she lost years ago, just before she left town. That's when I stopped completely. My sister had vanished without a trace when I was 12. The police never found her, but locals whispered that the Whispering Rose had taken her. I never believed it. But now, holding her scarf and hearing that voice calling my name in this cursed cornfield, I wasn't so sure anymore. The rustling turned frantic, almost desperate. "James, help me." I wanted to leave, to run out of that field and never come back. But I couldn't move. Something invisible held me there, locked in place between the stalks. Suddenly, the whispers shifted. They weren't my name anymore. They were a warning. Not all who wander here find their way back, and some names never leave the rows. I looked up, and for the first time, I saw a shadow move far ahead, too tall and too thin to be human. It didn't walk. It glided between the corn, its shape shifting with every step, flickering like a candle flame in the dark. I called out, "Who are you? What do you want?" The shadow stopped and turned slowly. There were no eyes, no face, just a void that swallowed the moonlight. "Your sister stays with us now." and soon you will join her." The voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a cold breath on my neck. I ran then, faster than I ever had. The rustling chased me, but this time it was angry, shouting my name as I burst out of the cornfield and into the open air. Since that night, I've never set foot near those fields again. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind is still and the moon is full, I hear the rustling outside my window. It sounds like corn stalks swaying, but if I listen closely, I swear it's calling my name. And I wonder, who else does it know? And how many names are still whispered in the rows, waiting to be claimed? It was the night of the harvest moon, a time when the golden light floods the earth, casting long shadows through endless fields of corn. For the farmers in that quiet Midwestern town, it was a night of tradition, a night to celebrate the season's bounty and honor the land. But for Emma, it became a night she would never forget, a night when the moon itself seemed to disappear and something else took its place. Emma had grown up in that town. Her family's farm nestled between rolling hills and miles of waving corn. Every autumn, she and her younger brother would help with the harvest, their hands sticky with husks and kernels, their breaths visible in the crisp night air. This year, the harvest moon was especially bright, hanging low and heavy, a giant amber orb illuminating the field like a spotlight. The night began like any other harvest moon evening. Laughter drifting from the farmhouse, the smell of cider and bonfires, the crunch of boots on dry earth. But Emma felt an unease she couldn't shake, like the air itself was holding its breath. Around midnight, her brother dared her to join him on a walk through the far edge of the cornfield, a part of the land no one ventured after dark. "The moon's too bright," he said with a nervous smile. "It feels like it's watching." Emma hesitated, but curiosity won over caution. They stepped into the tall corn stalks, the leaves brushing against their faces, the silvery light painting eerie patterns on the soil. The stalks seemed to close in around them, the sounds of the party fading into the distance. As they walked, the moon's glow started to flicker, like a candle struggling against the wind. Emma glanced up and then froze. The harvest moon was vanishing. Bit by bit, its amber light dimmed, swallowed by a darkness that wasn't the natural shadow of clouds. It was a creeping blackness, a void expanding across the sky. The cornfield was suddenly plunged into an unnatural gloom, not quite night, not quite day. Emma's heart hammered in her chest. "What's happening?" she whispered. Her brother didn't answer. He had stopped, staring ahead where the corn stalks twisted oddly in the dim light. A soft rustling came from deeper in the field, but it wasn't the usual breeze. It was deliberate, like footsteps. Emma's mind raced. Could it be an animal, a person, or something else? Then, from the darkness between the rows, a faint glow appeared, small, flickering, almost like a firefly. It moved slowly, weaving through the corn like it was searching for something. "Come on," Emma urged, grabbing her brother's hand. But he let go and stepped toward the light. "No," she gasped, but it was too late. He vanished into the cornfield. Emma called his name, her voice trembling, swallowed by the vastness. The light flickered out, and the silence returned. Heavier now, filled with an invisible presence. She was alone. Panic surged. Emma stumbled through the stalks, pushing aside leaves, desperate to find him. But the more she moved, the more the corn seemed to rearrange itself. Paths she thought she knew disappeared. New rows appeared where none had been. It was as if the field itself was alive, a maze designed to trap her. Suddenly, a whisper floated on the air, barely audible but unmistakable. "Stay." Emma spun around, but no one was there. Her breath caught as the voice came again, closer, and this time more urgent. "Stay with us." The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. She felt invisible eyes tracing her every move. Then she saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the field, just beyond the last stalks. It was tall, impossibly thin, cloaked in shadow. Its eyes reflected the faintest glimmer of the vanished moonlight. Emma wanted to run, but her feet wouldn't move. The figure raised a hand, pointing deeper into the corn. Desperate, Emma fought the paralysis and ran through tangled stalks over uneven ground until she burst out onto the open dirt road. Behind her, the field was silent once more, the moon now a faint silver crescent hidden by the returning clouds. Her brother was gone. In the days that followed, the townspeople searched the fields but found no trace. The corn swayed gently in the wind, as if nothing had disturbed it. But Emma knew the truth. The harvest moon had vanished that night to reveal a hidden world beneath the stalks, a place where light could not reach, and shadows whispered secrets older than the earth. And some harvests, she realized, were meant to be left uncollected. They say cornfields are innocent, just endless waves of green stalks dancing under the sun. But this one was different. It wasn't just the acres of twisted, yellowing corn that made people uneasy. It was what hid beneath the rows. Jacob had grown up near that old farm, a place everyone called Hollow Creek. He remembered his grandfather warning him, over and over, never to wander the field after sunset. Not because of wild animals or ghosts, but because something else was down there, something that belonged to the soil. The story started with a rumor, a whisper among locals, about a man who disappeared decades ago. His name was Earl, a reclusive farmhand who worked the fields but vanished without a trace one autumn night. The only clue was the freshly turned earth where the corn grew tallest, as if the ground itself had swallowed him whole. Jacob was a skeptic, like most kids, and curiosity gnawed at him like a moth to flame. On a crisp October evening, with the harvest moon hanging low and red, he decided to explore. Armed with only a flashlight and his grandfather's warnings echoing in his head, he slipped through the rustling stalks. The deeper he walked, the thicker the silence became. No crickets, no rustling birds, just the low whisper of the wind brushing against dry leaves. His light flickered briefly, and for a split second, Jacob swore he saw movement in the shadows, a shape crouched beneath the stalks, watching him. He pushed on until his boot caught on something hard and unnatural beneath the dirt. Kneeling down, he brushed aside loose soil and found what looked like an old, rusted metal box. A small, weather-beaten container sealed shut. With trembling fingers, he pried it open. Inside were brittle papers, yellowed with age, scribbled with frantic handwriting. They told of Earl's last days, how he had found strange holes beneath the field, like burrows but far too large and uneven to be animal dens. He wrote about hearing voices calling him beneath the earth, promising secrets buried deep, and how the corn would grow taller and darker near those holes. Jacob's heart pounded. Then he noticed something else, a faded photograph tucked between the papers. It showed Earl standing at the edge of the field, eyes wide and hollow, clutching a handful of corn stalks twisted in unnatural knots. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath him. He froze as the flashlight flickered and went out. In the pitch black, a cold breath whispered through the stalks, carrying a voice just beyond understanding. It said his name, a long, slow drag of sound like whined through dead leaves. Panicking, Jacob scrambled to his feet and ran. Behind him, the soil shifted as if something was rising beneath the rows. He dared not look back, but a chilling sensation crawled up his spine, the feeling of being watched by eyes buried beneath the earth itself. When he finally burst out of the field, Jacob glanced back once more. In the moonlight, the corn swayed violently, revealing a dark, gaping hole where no hole had been before. And from that hole, a pale hand reached out, fingers long, thin, and rooted in the soil. It started on a late September evening, just after the harvest season. The cornfields around my small hometown had been cut down for weeks, but one field near the edge of the county remained untouched. The owner said he was waiting for the right time to harvest it, but the locals whispered something else, that the corn there never fully died, no matter the frost. I never believed in such stories. Corn was corn, after all. Dead or alive, it didn't matter to me. But that night changed everything. I was driving home late after a friend's party. The sky was heavy with clouds, blotting out the stars. As I passed the old cornfield, my headlights caught something strange. A faint glow, like a flickering lantern, weaving through the tall stalks. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe a firefly or a reflection from my own car. But the glow moved, drifting steadily between the rows, too deliberate to be natural. Curiosity pulled me from the car. I grabbed my jacket and stepped into the cool night air, the crunch of dry corn husks beneath my boots. The lantern's light was warm but weak, barely piercing the thick curtain of corn around it. "Hello," I called out, but the only answer was the rustling of stalks in the wind. I moved toward the glow, heart pounding in the silence. The deeper I went, the brighter the lantern seemed to grow, but no one appeared. No shadow, no figure, just the pale light bobbing ahead, like a will-o'-the-wisp. Suddenly, the glow stopped. The lantern hung suspended in the air, flickering wildly, as if caught in a gust of unseen wind. I felt a chill creep up my spine. The corn around me began to seem unnaturally still. No breeze, no rustle, just the lantern. I reached out instinctively to grab it, but the moment my fingers brushed the iron handle, the light exploded into a flash. I stumbled back, dropping the lantern, which clattered on the dry soil, but the glow didn't go out. Instead, it lifted off, floating behind me, following me as I turned to run. I sprinted toward the edge of the field, but the lantern stayed just out of reach, bobbing and weaving through the rows like it was alive. It wasn't just following me, it was hunting me. Panic overtook me. The safe world of streetlights and pavement was suddenly miles away. The only path was a maze of corn stalks that felt taller and more twisted with every step. Shadows stretched and bent like claws, reaching for me in the moonless dark. I heard a whisper then, soft and low, curling around my ears. It wasn't words, not language I could understand, but a breathy hiss like whined through dead leaves. The lantern's light flickered in rhythm with the sound, pulsing like a heartbeat. I stumbled again and fell, scraping my hands on the cracked earth. When I looked up, the lantern was closer now, hanging just above the ground, the light casting jagged shadows that looked like fingers stretching to grab me. I scrambled up and kept running, the whisper growing louder, wrapping around me, squeezing tighter with every desperate step. Then, suddenly, the light vanished. Complete darkness swallowed the field. I froze, heart hammering, every nerve screaming in the silent black. I could feel the lantern, or whatever it was, hovering just behind me, waiting. I dare not turn around. Minutes, maybe hours passed. The cornfield felt endless, a living prison. Then a soft glow appeared ahead, faint at first, then growing brighter. The lantern, but this time it was different. No flicker, no bobbing. It hovered still, steady and calm. A soft light, almost like a beacon. I approached cautiously, and as I reached out, the light seeped into my skin, warm and cold at the same time, filling me with a strange calm. The whisper returned, clearer now. Words, Voices. A warning or a plea. I couldn't tell. Then, without warning, the field opened up. The corn rows ended abruptly at a fence I hadn't noticed before, old and broken, but passable. I stumbled through, and when I looked back, the lantern was gone. The field was just dark again, empty, silent. I ran all the way home. Days later, I told friends what happened, expecting laughter or disbelief. Instead, I found others who'd seen the same lantern in that field over the years, sometimes following farmers home, sometimes leading wanderers deeper, never returning. No one knew why it appeared or what it wanted. Some said it was a lost soul trapped between worlds. Others claimed it was a warning to stay away from the cursed corn that refused to die. I don't know what the lantern was or why it chose me, but sometimes at night, I still see a faint glow outside my window, flickering, waiting, like the field hasn't quite let me go. It was a dry summer in central Iowa, the kind that turned endless fields of corn into towering walls of brittle gold. Jonah, a college student home for the summer, had taken a job helping his uncle on the farm. Most days, it was mindless labor, fixing fences, moving equipment. But the farm had a secret Jonah was soon to learn. The farm's cornfields stretched for miles, interrupted only by the narrow irrigation tunnels that carried water beneath the earth to keep the crops alive. The tunnels were old, built decades ago, narrow and damp, forgotten by most except the farmhands who occasionally crawled through them to repair leaks. One evening, after a long day of work, Jonah's uncle asked him to check the southern irrigation tunnel. There had been strange pressure drops in the system, and if the water stopped flowing, the corn would die. With a flashlight and a coil of rope, Jonah approached the entrance, a rusty metal grate partially hidden by overgrown weeds. The moment Jonah stepped into the tunnel, the air changed. It was cooler, but stale and heavy, carrying an odd metallic scent. The narrow walls closed in, slick with moisture, the faint sound of dripping water echoing down the tunnel like slow, measured footsteps. The beam from his flashlight barely pierced the darkness ahead. Jonah moved carefully, his footsteps soft on the damp earth. After about 20 feet, he heard it, a faint whisper, too low to be anything but a trick of the wind, or so he hoped. He stopped listening. The whispering didn't grow louder, but seemed to circle him, as if the tunnel itself was breathing secrets. He tried to shake it off and moved on, checking the pipes along the walls. The leak was further down, but as Jonah advanced, the whispers returned, clearer this time. Not wind, not echoes, words, names, calling him. Jonah, Jonah. His breath caught. He spun around, shining his flashlight wildly back toward the tunnel entrance, but saw nothing except shifting shadows. The whispers faded. He told himself it was the stress or the strange acoustics underground, but the unease had settled deep inside him. When he reached the broken pipe, water was leaking into the soil, but oddly, the ground beneath the pipe seemed softer, almost like it had been recently disturbed. His flashlight caught something glinting in the dirt, a small, rusted metal token, half buried. Jonah picked it up. It was old, etched with a symbol he didn't recognize. 2 corn stalks intertwined like a twisted wreath. As he turned it over in his hand, the whispers came back, this time louder, urgent. "Don't leave, stay." His heart pounded. He shoved the token into his pocket and started back toward the tunnel entrance. But the tunnel seemed different now. The walls felt closer, the air thicker, harder to breathe, and the whispers didn't fade. They grew, layered with other voices, desperate and cold. "Join us. The harvest awaits." Suddenly, his flashlight flickered and died. Jonah fumbled, trying to get it to work, panic rising in his chest. In the total darkness, the whispers became a chorus, circling him, pressing in. He felt cold fingers brush his arm. Or was it just the damp air? He ran blindly, hands scraping the tunnel walls, trying to find a grate. At last, light spilled through the bars. Jonah scrambled out, gasping for air. He slammed the grate shut behind him and leaned against it, heart hammering. He didn't speak of the token or the whispers to anyone. But at night in the farmhouse, he would sometimes hear a faint rustling, like corn stalks brushing together in a breeze that didn't exist, and the soft, distant whisper of his name. The cornfield stretched out like an endless ocean of rustling green, tall stalks swaying in the faint breeze. It was the kind of place that looked peaceful during the day, but when darkness falls, everything changes. And that night, everything changed for Ethan. Ethan had grown up near the outskirts of a small Midwestern town. His family's farm bordered a massive cornfield that had been there longer than anyone could remember. The locals always whispered stories about things seen just beyond the rows, shadows moving against the moonlight, and strange sounds that made even the bravest farmer pause. Ethan had always been skeptical. The stories were old, handed down like folklore to scare children. But curiosity gnawed at him. On a dare from his friends, he agreed to walk to the far edge of the cornfield, the side no one ever went to after dark. The sun had just dipped below the horizon when he stepped into the field. At first, the tall corn blocked out almost everything. The stalks towered over him, each leaf brushing against his arms like silent fingers. The air smelled damp, heavy with earth and late summer decay. He moved slowly, the dry stalks crackling underfoot. The field seemed endless, each row perfectly aligned, disappearing into shadows that the weak moonlight could barely penetrate. At times, the wind made the corn rustle like a low whisper. Or was it a murmur of voices? Ethan's heart thumped louder as he pushed deeper into the maze of green. His flashlight beam flickered uncertainly, and the shadows seemed to twitch with life. Suddenly, he froze. From the corner of his eye, he caught movement. Something or someone stood just beyond the edge of the corn line, barely visible between two stalks. The figure didn't move, but Ethan could feel its gaze. It was watching him. He blinked, and it was gone. Breathing hard, he told himself it was just a trick of the light, maybe a tree branch or a deer stepping between the rows. But the unease settled deep inside him. Then he heard it, a faint, slow rustling, different from the wind. Ethan's flashlight flickered again, and when it steadied, he saw the figure once more. This time clearer. It was tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed too long. Its head was tilted slightly, as if curious. Its eyes? Dark pits that reflected no light. Ethan wanted to run, but his feet felt rooted in place. The watcher took a slow step forward, breaking the perfect silence with a dry snap of stalk. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He fumbled for his phone to call his friends, but the screen remained black. No signal. Panic rising, he turned to run, but the path behind him was no longer familiar. The rows seemed to twist and close in, swallowing the trail he had just made. The watcher stayed behind the corn line, never advancing further, but always observing. Ethan ran blindly through the maze, branches scratching his face, his lungs burning for air. But no matter how fast he moved, the sound of that slow, rustling followed like footsteps just behind him, but never quite close enough. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. Time seemed broken inside that field. Suddenly, the corn stopped. Ethan stumbled out into a small clearing, breathless and disoriented. In the middle stood an old scarecrow, weathered and worn, but its eyes glowed faintly, like embers in the dark. Behind the scarecrow, Shadows twisted and coalesced, forming shapes that flickered like smoke. The Watcher wasn't just a thing hiding in the corn. It was something ancient, something bound to this land. The Scarecrow's gaze followed Ethan as he backed away, his mind racing. He realized with a chilling certainty that the Watcher had never intended to harm him. Not yet. It was waiting, watching, learning. And now, Ethan was part of the field. Every night since, he hears the rustling again, the slow, deliberate whisper of the Watcher beyond the corn line, reminding him that some places keep secrets too dark to ever leave behind. It was supposed to be a simple night. Jason, an amateur drone enthusiast, had ventured out to capture aerial footage of the vast cornfields just outside his hometown. The harvest season was approaching, and the golden stalks swayed softly under the pale moonlight, a sea of waving shadows stretching farther than the eye could see. The cornfield was quiet, eerily so. The usual chorus of crickets and night creatures was absent. Only the faint rustle of the corn stalks, stirred by a gentle breeze, filled the air. Jason felt a strange chill crawl up his spine, but he chalked it up to nerves. After all, flying drones at night wasn't exactly common, but it was his hobby, a way to escape the monotony of small-town life. He launched the drone from the dirt path bordering the field, watching the bright LEDs flicker as it ascended into the black sky. The controller's screen showed a live feed, rows of corn stalks bathed in moonlight, shifting shadows, and somewhere deep inside, a strange stillness. Minutes passed, and the drone climbed higher. Jason was excited, framing shots of the moon's pale, glow glinting over the endless corn. Suddenly, the feed flickered, a sharp, static distortion, then cut out entirely. Jason's heart thudded. No, he muttered, tapping buttons frantically, trying to regain signal. But nothing. Then a strange sound, faint, distant, like something dragging on dry earth, filtered through the night. He looked up, scanning the field's edge, but saw nothing. The rustling grew louder, closer. The corn stalks bent and shifted, but there was no wind strong enough for such movement. Jason called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" His voice was swallowed by the thick night air. His phone buzzed with an incoming call, but the screen showed only static. Suddenly, the drone's signal cut out again, and a metallic clang echoed nearby. Heart racing, Jason stepped off the path and into the cornfield. The stalks brushed against his arms, wet with dew or something colder. He moved carefully, following the sound of metal scraping against soil. Then he saw it. The drone crumpled on the ground, its lights dead, its frame twisted like a crushed insect. Jason reached down to pick it up, but paused. Something was wrong. The silence had deepened. The night was no longer just quiet. It was dead silent. No insects chirping, no breeze stirring the leaves. The cornfield seemed to hold its breath. A sudden snapping sound came from behind him. He spun around, breath caught in his throat. In the shadows between the stalks stood a figure. It was tall and thin, unnaturally still, its outline just barely visible in the moonlight. Jason's mind screamed to run, but his legs froze. The figure took a slow step forward, the rustling stalks parting like water. Jason noticed its eyes, if they could be called that, were empty, black voids reflecting no light. The creature opened its mouth, but no sound came out. Jason's chest tightened as a cold dread settled over him. Then, without warning, the figure vanished into the darkness. Jason dropped the drone and bolted back toward the dirt path, not daring to look back. When he reached the road, the silence broke. The night sounds returned abruptly, as if nothing had happened. But Jason knew better. For days afterward, his drone footage was corrupted, showing only static and brief flashes of that tall, silent figure. Every time he closed his eyes, the dead silence of the cornfield returned, and the feeling that something was still watching, waiting for the drone to fall again. They say maps are meant to guide us, to keep us safe. But what happens when the land beneath your feet refuses to exist on any map, no matter how detailed? When the roads end but the corn keeps growing, silent, endless, and unseen. This is the story of a cornfield that wasn't on the map, and what happened when one curious man tried to find it. It began with Jack, a freelance cartographer obsessed with forgotten places. His job was simple: map the unmappable. Abandoned towns, old railroad lines, fields forgotten by time. One day, while researching rural Illinois, he stumbled across a reference in an old farmer's journal, a cornfield that locals whispered about, but no one could officially locate. The journal mentioned a place called Whispering Rose, a cornfield that stretched beyond the horizon. But curiously, it wasn't marked on any official map or GPS system. Intrigued, Jack packed his gear and set out to find it. Jack drove down winding country roads, watching familiar fields give way to more sparse farmland. His GPS started to glitch the moment he passed the last known farmstead. The screen blinked no signal. Undeterred, he followed directions scribbled in the farmer's journal. When the road ends, the rows begin. Soon, the pavement vanished, replaced by a dirt track flanked by towering stalks of corn. The air was unnervingly still. The usual night sounds, crickets, frogs, were absent, swallowed by a heavy silence. Jack's footsteps crunched on dry soil as he ventured deeper. The cornfield was massive. Taller than Jack's head, the stalks seemed to close in around him, shadows twisting in the moonlight. The only illumination was his flashlight beam, slicing through the darkness, but revealing nothing but more endless rows. He noticed something strange. No wind stirred the corn. Not a single leaf rustled. The journal had warned of this unnatural stillness, a silence that felt like a warning. As Jack moved forward, he found footprints in the dirt. They weren't his own, but looked fresh. They led deeper into the cornfield, then suddenly stopped. No return path. It was as if whoever walked here vanished into thin air. Unease grew in Jack's chest. He turned to head back, but quickly realized he had lost sight of the dirt track. Every direction looked the same, a maze of towering corn stalks that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking. Then came the whispers. At first, they were faint, soft, almost like the wind caressing the leaves. But the air was still. The whispers grew clearer, faint voices calling Jack's name, coaxing him further in. He couldn't tell if they were behind him or all around him. His flashlight flickered, plunging him into darkness for seconds that stretched like minutes. When the light returned, Jack saw a figure at the edge of the beam, barely visible, pale and still, watching him from between the rows. Jack's heart pounded. He called out, but the figure didn't move. It vanished as suddenly as it appeared, swallowed by the corn. Panic set in. The whispers grew louder, almost urgent. Jack ran, but the rows seemed to close ranks behind him. Every step felt heavier, as if the earth itself resisted his escape. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Jack couldn't tell. Time lost meaning. The sky disappeared behind the dense canopy of stalks, blotting out stars and moon. Jack tripped over something cold and hard. Looking down, he saw a weathered metal box buried in the dirt. Inside, old maps of the area, but the one that caught his eye was a crude drawing of Whispering Rose with a note. Once you enter, you become part of the field. The rows remember. The rows take. The whispering turned to voices, many voices overlapping, echoing with sorrow and anger. Jack staggered backward, the shadows around him twisting into grotesque shapes. Faces formed in the corn leaves, twisted, mournful, silently screaming. He screamed for help, but only the whispers answered. Desperate, Jack remembered the journal's final warning. If you hear the whispers, stay still. Do not run. The field feeds on fear. He forced himself to freeze, heart racing, sweat chilling his skin. The voices paused. The faces melted back into stalks. Minutes crawled by. Then the wind began, a cold, eerie breeze rustling the corn for the first time. A narrow path opened behind him. Jack ran blindly, bursting out of the cornfield just as dawn painted the sky. But when he looked back, the field seemed smaller. The endless rows suddenly appeared neatly trimmed, like a farm ready for harvest. Jack's GPS snapped back to life. The field was gone. No dirt track, no signs of footprints, no metal box, and Whispering Rows still didn't exist on any map. Jack never spoke of what he saw, but sometimes, late at night, he swore he could hear whispers in the wind, calling his name from a place not found on any map. The night was unusually still when I decided to take the shortcut home through the old cornfield. It was something I never did before. The field had a reputation. Locals said things moved in there, things that didn't belong. But that night, the shortcut was tempting. I was tired, my phone was dying, and the road detour had added miles I didn't want to walk. The cornfield stretched before me, stalks towering and thick, their leaves rustling softly in the light breeze. At first, I tried to ignore the eerie feeling settling in my gut, the kind that whispers you shouldn't be here. The dirt path was barely visible, hidden beneath fallen leaves and broken stalks. My footsteps crunched softly, swallowed quickly by the dense quiet. Halfway through, I noticed something strange, a faint wet dragging sound behind me, like nails scratching against dry earth, but slower, more deliberate. I stopped and listened. Nothing but the wind and the occasional hoot of an owl. I shook my head, blaming my imagination, and kept moving. The path twisted, and the shadows grew longer. The moon had just slipped behind a cloud, plunging the cornfield into deeper darkness. That's when I felt it, something brushing my leg, soft but cold, crawling. I jerked away, heart pounding, and showed my phone's dying light to the ground. Nothing, just the cracked soil and scattered leaves. I told myself it was a rat or some field mouse. But then it happened again. This time, more insistent, a slow, deliberate movement pressing against my ankle. I froze, holding my breath. The darkness felt alive, closing in. Suddenly, a wet, rasping noise came from just beside me. Something low and slithering, scraping against the dirt and stalks. I turned quickly, the light flickering as my phone buzzed with low battery warnings. There, just beyond the faint glow, I caught a glimpse. It wasn't human, not quite animal. Long, thin limbs tangled in the corn, pale and slick like it had crawled from some underground pit. Its head twisted unnaturally, eyes reflecting a faint, unnatural light. I wanted to scream, but my voice was gone. I took a step back, and it followed, dragging itself closer with a slow, deliberate crawl, leaving behind a trail of wet earth and something darker. My mind raced for explanations. Was it a trapped animal, a farmhand gone mad, or something else, something older than the fields themselves? I remembered the stories of people disappearing in the cornfields, returning days later changed, silent, eyes glazed. Some whispered about an ancient creature, born from the soil, feeding on fear and darkness. The locals called it the crawler. My breath hitched. The thing was crawling closer, the scraping sound louder, like nails digging into dry wood. I scrambled backward, tripping over a root, and slammed into a thick stalk. In that moment of panic, my phone died, plunging me into complete darkness. I reached out blindly, fingers brushing against cold, clammy skin. Or was it something else? I pulled away sharply, stumbling forward with only the moonlight filtering through the canopy. Then silence. The rustling stopped. No wet dragging sound. No unnatural breathing. I ran, bursting out of the cornfield into the open road, heart hammering. I looked back once, the edge of the cornfield dark and still. But I knew something had been crawling beside me, waiting in the shadows of the stalks, watching me leave. And it was still out there. They say that corn grows best when it's fed. That's just a saying in the Midwest. At least that's what I thought. But after what happened to Jeremiah Boone, nobody jokes like that around here anymore. Back in 2012, Jeremiah was a seasonal farmhand at the Ryerson Farm, an old family-owned property sitting on the edge of County Road 14, right where the asphalt ends and dirt takes over. He was a quiet guy, maybe too quiet, but he worked hard, never complained, and always kept to himself. That season, he arrived just before harvest, when the stalks are tall, brittle, and thick enough to drown out screams. It started subtly. The Ryersons noticed the corn was wrong. Patches of it were blackened at the tips, and not from rot or pests. Something had singed the leaves from the inside, like a heat without fire. A few scarecrows went missing, not toppled or blown away, just gone. Posts left standing in empty rows. Jeremiah never said much, but he began sleeping in the barn instead of the house. When asked, he muttered something about the wind whispering too loud in the fields. Everyone laughed, thinking he was just trying to scare the younger workers. But Mrs. Ryerson found something the next morning that made her stop laughing. A line of corn cobs had been stacked neatly on the porch, each one shucked, with something carved into the kernels, spirals, crosses, eyes. One had a tooth embedded in it. She assumed it was some sick prank, but nobody claimed it. That night, Jeremiah disappeared. His truck was still in the gravel lot, and all his tools were neatly stacked by the shed. The only thing out of place was the cornfield. One long aisle of stalks had been flattened. Not trampled, not mowed, just collapsed, perfectly symmetrical, as if something had passed through it without touching the soil. The Ryersons filed a missing person report, and search parties were formed. They combed the woods. They flew a drone over the fields. But they found nothing. Not a shoe print. Not a drop of blood. Not even his hat. For 4 days, there was silence. Then, just before dawn on the 5th day, he came back. Jeremiah stumbled out of the corn like he'd never left. But something was wrong. His gait was off, stiff, mechanical. His clothes were torn, but not like he'd been caught on branches. It looked more like they had been peeled, layers of denim and cotton stripped like bark from a tree. And then there were his eyes. He didn't have any. There were no wounds, no blood. Just 2 sunken hollows, smooth and clean, as if his eyes had never existed in the first place. The sockets weren't empty. They were filled with something else. Corn silk. The authorities came. They asked questions. Jeremiah didn't answer. He sat in a wooden chair on the porch, gently rocking, head tilted back toward the fields like he was listening for something. Every few hours, he'd murmur phrases no one understood. 13 steps, husk to husk. It watches, it watches. Medical teams took him in, but within 24 hours, he vanished from the hospital. Security footage caught the moment. At 2:13 a.m., Jeremiah stood up from his bed, still blind, and walked out of the room without a single misstep. He passed nurses, turned corners, avoided obstacles within human precision, and stepped into the emergency stairwell. By the time anyone checked the cameras outside, he was already gone, swallowed up by the night. The Ryerson farm closed that season. The crops were never harvested. Insurance declared the land unfit after soil tests returned abnormal readings. Elevated radiation, metallic traces, a bizarre fungal growth under the roots that didn't match any known species. 2 years later, hikers found a campsite abandoned near those same fields. The fire was still smoldering. A phone was left recording on the ground, half buried in leaves. The final footage showed a young man standing in the center of the corn rows at night. He was whispering something. They took him, the blind one. He brought them here. They can't see, but they hear. They live under the soil. beneath the dead roots. Then the video cut to static. No bodies were ever found. Local legend, says Jeremiah, never really returned. That what walked out of the corn that morning was not human. That the field had made a bargain, and he'd been the offering. Even today, the land hasn't sold. Crops won't grow there. Machinery breaks down when it gets too close. Drones lose signal. Livestock refuse to cross the perimeter. And on still nights in autumn, when the wind passes through the hollow fields, some swear they see a figure walking the rows. Blind, slow, listening. They say if you stand too long on that land, you'll hear it too. A voice with no mouth, a whisper made of silk, and the soft crackle of something peeling. WKR0N was the kind of local radio station you'd only hear if you were stuck on a back road in the middle of nowhere. Nestled between a dying town and miles of cornfields, it sat like an island of noise in a sea of silence. Only one gravel road led to it, and for years it was manned by one person, DJ Martin Ray. Locals called him Midnight Marty, known for his gravelly voice, strange playlists, and a fondness for telling bizarre stories between songs that left you with more questions than answers. For decades, WRZO broadcasted nightly from a squat concrete building with a rusting tower behind it, surrounded by nothing but rows of corn. There was something off about that cornfield, locals said. GPS didn't work right once you passed the old irrigation ditch. The stalks never fully died, even in the dead of winter. More than one person swore they saw lights between the rows long after the harvest. Then one day, the broadcast stopped. No final goodbye, no static, just silence. But a week later, a chilling file surfaced online. No one knows who uploaded it. It had no metadata, no timestamp, and the station had long since gone off air. Yet the voice was unmistakably Marty's. The recording was labeled last broadcast. Underscore underscore. Check 1, check 2. If you're hearing this, maybe it's already too late. Or maybe I've finally reached the ones listening behind the frequency. Either way, it's just me out here tonight. Marty from WKR0N. And I think the corn is listening now. Underscore underscore. The recording starts like one of Marty's usual monologues, casual but cryptic. But the longer it plays, the more strained his voice becomes. Less performance, more desperation. He talks about interference, not static or dead air. Something worse, an echo that repeated him before he said the words, as if the station was playing him in reverse, anticipating what he was about to say. He began noticing things outside the studio window. Flashlights at first, or what he thought were flashlights. Pale, flickering orbs bobbing between the rows of corn. But no cars ever pulled up. No footsteps on the gravel. Just those lights swaying like they were attached to something tall. Taller than a person. Marty swore he saw them bend the corn stalks backward, like they were moving against the wind. In the recording, he pauses, then whispers. They've been getting closer every night. The lights and the humming. It's inside my teeth now. I think they're using the signal, not to talk to us, but to learn. He began playing old broadcasts backward, not out of curiosity, but because he said he could hear something else beneath them. Voices layered in the static, foreign but rhythmic, like chanting. He tried cutting power to the tower, but the signal kept broadcasting. Dead air at first, then something new. A strange, low sound that pulsed every few seconds, almost like breathing. Marty stopped playing music altogether. He just talked and begged for someone to come, for someone to pull him out. He claimed the corn wasn't just growing, it was rewriting itself, twisting in unnatural angles, blooming black husks filled with antenna-like filaments. He described a stalk with a human molar growing from it. He tried leaving once, made it 50 feet before the road behind him disappeared. Not fog, not darkness, just gone, like the corn had erased it. All directions led back to the station. In the recording's final moments, Marty's voice grows faint. Not just quiet, distant, like he's broadcasting from underwater or underground. You can hear him shuffle around. Then, faintly, "I'm not in the studio anymore. I think they moved me, but they left the mic on. They want you to hear." Then silence. But exactly 13 seconds later, a new voice enters. Hollow, clipped, not Marty's. It's unintelligible at first, until slowed down. "We needed the mouth. Thank you for lending him." The file ends with a single tone. Low, mechanical, but some have said that if you loop that tone long enough, you can hear faint tapping behind it, like nails clicking against glass, or someone trying to respond from the other side. After the file surfaced, WKR0NS transmitter was removed. The building? Still there, empty, half-eaten by vines. But at night, some say if you drive past the corn line with your car radio on scan, the dial stops by itself, right at 101.3 FM. And if you're quiet, really quiet, you can hear a faint voice whispering, asking, "Is anyone listening tonight?"